of the Council. I am Councillor James Caston, Chairman of Mid-Suffolk District Council, and I'll be chairing this meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room, opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available from the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it's safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent, and laptops, please. I'd like to remind everyone present here that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there's confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to this meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting, you are also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. And I'll move to the agenda. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Amoroson, Councillor Brewster, Councillor Gould, Councillor Eburn, Councillor Guthrie, Councillor Phillips and Councillor Davies.
Thank you. Declarations of interest from councillors. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Right, item 3, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of October for accuracy only. Does anyone have any issues with accuracy? No. Could I get a proposer for those minutes? Councillor Hadnam. And could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Muller. All those in favour will do this by show of hands. That's carried. Thank you. Item 4 is the Chairman's announcements. I'll refer you to paper MC 2227 for noting. Thank you. Item 5 is Leaders' announcements. And I'd like to invite Councillor Morley to present her update. Following this, we will have questions, not just questions on clarity, but questions on things within the Leaders' announcements.
Thank you, Chair. The death of 2-year-old Awa Bishak after exposure to mould in his family's flat in Rochdale was a tragedy, and I'm sure that all members will join me in expressing our sympathies to his family. This sad case has rightly put the standard of social housing in the spotlight. In the last week, Housing Secretary Michael Gove has written to all housing providers in England, including Baber and Mid-Suffolk councils, calling for an urgent assessment of homes to provide reassurance over standards. But we didn't wait for this government letter in order to act. We had already begun initiating work to address this. Members will be aware that we initiated a full diagnostic review of building services earlier in the year. This picked up on the need to increase our input into resolving issues around mould and damp, and we have acted on those recommendations. This year, for example, we have trained more people to deliver damp and mould treatment and employed a damp specialist surveyor. We are also recruiting another surveyor to increase capacity. The well-being of our tenants has always been a priority, and following this case, I can promise members that we will redouble our efforts to ensure the quality of all our homes so that such a tragedy cannot happen here. I've spoken to our new Housing Director, Deborah Fenton, who has updated me on the actions already taken this year to resolve any damp and mould issues, and further measures are planned. We're also progressing well with our stock condition survey and are developing and costing a retrofit programme. The Housing Directorate will also be developing a performance framework to be presented to cabinets and the tenant board every quarter helping both members and tenants hold us to account. And this work is just a part of what we're doing to ensure our homes are fit for the future. Since our last full council meeting, an historic county deal for Suffolk has been announced by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. This is the first county deal of its kind in the country, and if agreed, will deliver decades of significant additional investment into local priorities. It will give Suffolk greater decision-making powers around the likes of transport, infrastructure and skills. As you know, Suffolk public sector leaders, including from Mid-Suffolk and Labour, and our MPs, have been working collaboratively on this for some time. It has been a great example of Suffolk working together for the benefit of residents and businesses. The Chancellor said Suffolk would get a directly elected mayor, but I want to clarify that Suffolk is actually pursuing a model where the leader of Suffolk County Council is directly elected by the people of Suffolk. It will not be an elected mayor, and the current leader cabinet model will be retained. The proposed change would not add any new levels of bureaucracy nor create any new offices. I will keep you informed about the county deal as it progresses. Next week, Mid-Suffolk District Council will publish our end-of-term report. This report tells the story of our council's fantastic achievements in the last 4 years. It covers the full breadth of what we have done, from how we have supported many thousands of residents and businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic, to how we are now helping in the cost of living crisis. But it is not just about how we have magnificently stepped up to the challenges we have faced. It is a celebration of the outstanding work done by the council in all areas, including planning and housing, driving economic growth and delivering a vision for our district and its communities. I would urge everyone to read it as soon as it's published, reflect on our achievements and feel pride in what we do. And please share it with people and parishes in your ward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morley. Do we have any questions? Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased that a check is being carried out of the damp within the homes that we look after. Councillor Haddingham and I know of one instance where damage to a roof was reported in February, and when I was eventually told of it, it was reported many times to housing. Nothing was done. Eventually, I managed to get through to somebody who repaired the roof, but they did not look in the roof space. The first repair that was done was not to the roof, it was to lay a polythene sheet in the roof space. Nobody has checked that the loft insulation is wet, nor have they done anything about it. So, yeah, you might know that you've got these checks going on, but we have seen the photographs of the damp coming through from the wet loft insulation. Can you please ensure something's done about it?
Councillor Morley.
Yes. I had hoped to be able to introduce our new Director of Housing to you all tonight. Deborah Fenton, our new Director, has been in place for just over a week, and I'd like to give her time to get to grips with all the figures and also the people in her department. So while I can't answer your direct question or your specific question on that, we will be preparing a briefing paper to go out once Deborah has clarified all the issues.
Thank you. Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for those announcements. Can I just ask again about the damp treatment? A lot of the problems around damp are caused by allergic reactions to spores and that kind of thing. Can I ask whether the treatments are going to centre on structural issues and on heating issues to address the root causes of the problem and are not just going to be chemical treatments to kill the mould, because allergic reactions to those chemical treatments can be just as bad and they don't treat the root cause. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
I can't answer your specific questions. We haven't done that research yet, but at the appropriate time we will publish something that gets into the more detail.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you. A question really to back up what Councillor Wellham was saying. I regularly attend a sheltered accommodation because we run a club there. But there's an individual there who has significant disabilities, who had roof leaking. It's at least a year ago. I think it's actually 2, but at least a year ago. Has variously been told repairing it's too expensive for the council to consider. A very similar solution to the one that was mentioned was put in place, something in a membrane in the roof space. It subsequently, a couple of weeks ago, when it poured hard, rained again, and we're subjecting a person who has very substantial disabilities and things to an appalling life. So just seeking again the assurance that it's not just damp that will be addressed, it's all issues of outstanding maintenance of that type. And particularly this is an area where clearly the scheme manager contacts the council regularly and gets absolutely nowhere with pushing forward repairs.
Thank you. Councillor Haddingham is offered to take this question as that's her particular area. So, Councillor Haddingham.
Sorry, just to...
Sorry, Councillor Morley. No, we're just going to leave that to Councillor Morley. Thank you.
Yeah, all I can do is repeat the answer that I gave to the previous question, which is the answer is exactly the same. As soon as we have details on the detail that you're seeking, we will publish it for you.
Thank you. Councillor Otten.
Oh, hello. Yes, obviously we're all tragic to hear the news of a child who actually died, but there was another child who was very, very seriously ill as a result of mould within its accommodation. But his problems were actually exacerbated by the company trying to resolve the mould problem and using chemicals to actually spray the house. Of course, the child then reacted very badly to those chemicals and ended up very, very seriously ill in hospital. And I'd like the assurance of the Housing Cabinet portfolio holder that no chemicals will be used in any of those properties where this work needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I refer the councillor to my previous announcement, my previous response. When we have, I'm not going to answer questions on every single person in the district. When we've got the detail, we'll share it.
Thank you very much. And I can't see any... Oh, Councillor Scarf.
Thank you. I mean, it's relating to the same issue, but a slightly different context. We heard on Monday, actually, at Scrutiny Committee about the work that CA do and the problems with the cost of living, which is directly related to us as well, and heating. And sometimes the problem is its lack of suitable ventilation, the inability to afford the heating in order to keep the mould at bay or keep the condensation at bay. So can the leader give us some assurance that when our staff go and look at that issue, they look at it holistically, and perhaps if there's something they can do with the, obviously with the permission of the tenant, maybe they can put them in touch with CA in terms of advice. They might be able to apply for heating vouchers, which CA hand out. Basically, can we have an holistic approach? Because it's not just a silo approach in terms of this issue. It's a bigger issue, and they may be able to give some practical advice and some help, which might actually, long-term, more eliminate the problem than trying to cure the mould in the first place.
Just at this point, I'd say that we're straying into Councillor Hadnam's portfolio here, and she's not able to answer questions on leaders' announcements. So if you do have any further questions, could you email them to Councillor Hadnam, the portfolio holder, please? And I'll move on. Thank you. So, item 6, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with Council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Thank you very much. And item 7, questions by the public in accordance with the Council procedure rules. I refer you to the questions in the tabled papers, and I would like to invite Mr. Pyle, to ask his question. Please, please step up, Mr. Pyle.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had a promotion already, have I? I appreciate that. Do you want me to sit or stand?
Please, whatever you're comfortable with, but yeah.
I'll stand. So, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight to ask a question. Given that on the 9th of November 2022, a Development Control Committee refused permission for a single house in Elmswell because it was to be built on public open space, how is it possible that Mid-Suffolk Cabinet continued to plan for 50 houses on 9 acres of public open space on the other side of the village?
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Now, Councillor Gould is not here because of ill health, but Councillor Richardson has offered to step in. So, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Pyle, for your question. I'm not party to the specifics of the case that you refer to, although I am reliably informed that the Planning Committee report concluded that insufficient information had been provided by the applicant in that case to determine whether the proposal accorded with the National Planning Policy Framework. As each planning case is determined on its own merits, I don't think it's appropriate to compare sites in this way, particularly as the formal status of these sites differs within our emerging local plan. As members will be aware, the Council is considering the delivery of an exemplar sustainable residential development in Elmswell of approximately 50 homes on a site within the Council's ownership at Church and School Roads, though it is still in its early days in terms of shaping this proposal further. The first community engagement event took place last week, which provided significant feedback for further consideration, and we are very grateful for the high level of attendance and engagement from the community within Elmswell, and there will be further engagement in this regard, and any scheme will of course in due course be considered by the Planning Authority and assessed accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Mr. Pyle, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please. So, acres, given the positive discussions with Elmswell Parish Council about the possibility of a new primary school on the site, why is this option being dropped?
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this matter of the question of a primary school has been discussed at Cabinet both early this month and I think last year as well. The issue being, and members will be aware of the difficulties associated with HRA ownership of land, but for simplicity, the actual site itself is owned by the Housing Revenue Account, which for legal reasons is a separate ring-fenced entity from Mid-Suffolk's otherwise general fund. What this means in practice is that for any disposal of the land, for purposes not for housing purposes, we would need to prove that there was no way the land could facilitate housing and that there was no need for housing within the particular area. Now, given that Elmswell is designated as a core village within our emerging local plan, given that it's a highly sustainable village, given the amenities that are present, given the fact that it's got excellent transport connections, we cannot prove either of those two criteria. And the decision ultimately would have to go to the Secretary of State for approval, provided we didn't meet either of those conditions. And unfortunately, in this particular instance, we can't prove that. We don't think we'll get the Secretary of State's approval for that disposal of the land. So whilst we've had extensive conversations with local stakeholders, the approach that we've taken, and that's the advice that we as Cabinet have received from officers, is that this site is suitable for the delivery of housing. There is a need for particularly affordable housing within Elmswell and the local area, and and for that reason, Cabinet's indication earlier this month was that we wish to proceed with housing for that site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Mr Parr for coming in and asking his question, and thank Councillor Richardson for stepping in for Councillor Gold to answer it. And we'll move on to item 8, questions by councillors in accordance with the council procedure rules. I refer you to the questions in the table papers, and I'd like to invite Councillor Mellon to ask his question.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Morley, as leader of the council, has welcomed the announcement of a devolution deal for Suffolk with a directly elected council leader. What level of involvement will other councillors in this authority have in agreeing this change to Suffolk's governance? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That question for Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. Any change to a directly elected leader for Suffolk County Council is a governance change for Suffolk County Council, and Mid-Suffolk District Council would not be involved in that.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Councillor Mellon, do you have a supplementary question?
Which one do I choose? Does she agree that there is a lack of clarity in the current information in the public domain about how this new role will work?
Thank you. Councillor Morley, would you like to respond?
Yes, I do.
Right. Thank you. And the next item is councillor appointments. Are there any changes to places? No. No. Thank you. And so we go to item 10, which is motions on notice. To consider the motions on notice received from Councillor Morley. So, Councillor Morley, would you like to move your motion?
Thank you, Chair. This motion is a template that councillors and councils can use to publicly demonstrate their commitment to improving the quality of public and political debate and challenging abuse and intimidation of people in public life by signing up to the LGA Debate Not Hate campaign. Councils that have passed such a motion should email, and the email address that's listed in the papers is actually misspelt. It should say Debate Not Hate rather than Note Hate at local.gov.uk, to be added to the list of public organisations supporting the campaign. Councils who've signed up will receive more information on how councils can support the campaign and improve support for councillors in their local areas. And councillors can also find more information on the Debate Not Hate campaign website. The intimidation and abuse of councillors, in person or otherwise, undermines democracy, preventing elected members from representing the communities they serve, deterring individuals from standing for election, and undermining public life in democratic processes. This council notes that increasing levels of toxicity in public and political discourse is having a detrimental impact on local democracy, and that prevention, support and responses to abuse and intimidation of local politicians must improve to ensure councillors feel safe and able to continue representing their residents. This council therefore commits to challenge the normalisation of abuse against councillors and uphold exemplary standards of public and political debate in all it does. The council further agrees to sign up to the LGA's Debate Not Hate campaign. Whereas this campaign aims to raise public awareness of the role of councillors in local communities, encourage healthy debate and improve the response to and support for local politicians facing abuse and intimidation. In addition, this council resolves to write to our local members of parliament to ask them to support the campaign, and write to the government to ask them to work with the LGA to develop and implement a plan to address abuse and intimidation of politicians. Regularly review the support available to councillors in relation to abuse and intimidation and councillor safety, and work with the local police to ensure there is a clear and joined up mechanism for reporting threats and other concerns about the safety of councillors and their families. And we should also take a zero tolerance approach to the abuse of councillors and officers. Thank you, Chair. I'll call for a second.
Thank you very much. And I think Councillor Mellon's got his name down to second this. Councillor Mellon.
Yeah, I'm happy to second this, and I'll speak now, if that's okay.
Okay, yes, please.
So I was very pleased when Councillor Morley asked me to second this motion. A few weeks ago, I went to an LGA event in London, and as part of the day, we heard a presentation about this Debate Not Hate initiative. It seems to be the case with all LGA events. I came away with a load of useful information and COVID. But having recovered from that, I'm pleased to have this early opportunity to endorse this very worthwhile campaign. I was thinking back over the 3.5 years I've been a district councillor, and a few years before that as a parish councillor, and I couldn't really think of many occasions when I had received abuse or intimidation, though I have been at a few meetings where feelings have run high. But when I started to widen that out and think about people that I know, I soon came up with some very sad and worrying examples. You don't have to look very far. As I'm sure we're all aware, Councillor John Ward, leader of Baber, had a campaign of intimidation focused on him, with a group of people even coming to his home and causing alarm and distress to his family, which was a totally unacceptable situation. I was very glad to see that the police took it seriously. Another example I thought of is some councillor colleagues in Beccles. During the first COVID lockdown, in a bid to keep the local economy working, they arranged to set up separation barriers for safe queuing in the town centre. What was a very laudable initiative, but not everyone agreed with it, and there were some downsides in terms of vehicle movements. But what ensued from that was a ferocious campaign against those two councillors. They were belittled, they were threatened, and their families suffered intimidation, which ended up with the police being involved. And these two councillors were advised to stay locked in at home for 2 weeks, and one of them has even moved away from the area as a result. So again, totally unacceptable behaviour from a vocal minority who weren't prepared to use the proper channels of debate, but just wanted to achieve their aims by any means. And the third example I thought of is my older brother David. As some of you know, he's the leader of Nottingham City Council, and he's served that community as a councillor and as leader for about 20 years now. But has unfortunately had to make some very tough choices as leader, service cuts and that sort of thing. But the level of criticism and vitriol and abuse he receives is truly appalling. I don't know how he handles it. These are just 3 examples I thought of, but all 3 encourage me to support this motion and encourage my colleagues to do so too. If we want more people to stand as councillors and serve their communities, we need to call out these sort of behaviours whenever we see them. But I'll finish on a more positive note. This motion talks about committing ourselves to upholding exemplary standards of public and political debate. And I think in this council we generally do, and I very much appreciate that. You know, we disagree, and sometimes we strongly disagree, and the debate can be robust. You know, we as an opposition have been critical of some of the decisions the administration has taken, and you've been critical of our stance at other times. But in the main, that debate has been civil, it's been polite, it's been courteous, and we shouldn't take that for granted. We should continue to aim high. No doubt we will continue to disagree on some issues, but on this motion, I think we can come together to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. And at the end of the debate, if you wish to say anything more, I'll allow that. So I'd like to go to debate, and each councillor will be able to speak for once for no more than 3 minutes. And the first person is Councillor Passmore.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Well, just a few comments. I've got no hesitation in supporting this motion, and just a few reflections, I suppose. I think democracy, the opportunity for us all to vote in elections, whatever they are, is something that we should cherish. Sadly, in society, too many people
don't recognise that. Every single one of us here has a democratic mandate, and I think that's important because that's the way we work in this country. And I think, was it Churchill said, our system, or words to that effect, isn't very good. The trouble is everything else is worse. Now, there is no perfect system. We could discuss that, but I would agree with you, Andrew and Susie. The debate we have here is civilised, and that's how it should be. You agree to differ, you put your differences in the ballot box or whatever it is, but just reflect what happens in places like Russia, China, other dictatorial regimes where there is no chance for anybody to vote at all. You can vote this way as long as you do as you're told. Well, that isn't the way we work. And despite the difficulties, challenges we all have, etc., in this country going back for many years, I think our system has served us pretty well. And I think that's something we need to look after. There are difficult decisions you always have to make in any elected position, doesn't matter what level it is. The art of good communication, of course, is important. But I do detect there is a somewhat unpleasant tenor for the things that people say, and particularly on social media where you can hide away because you, frankly, in some cases, haven't got the guts to stand up and say it properly in a civilised way. I can think of other councils not very far from here where there's been some pretty poisonous comment which is uncalled for. I'm not going to name them. I could actually suggest that some of that is almost akin to a hate crime. There is no place in our society for hate crime of any description, be it about sexuality, gender, political beliefs. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And we do need to try and take a lead to stop that. And the first way we can do that is here in this chamber, which I honestly do think happens. If I can go back nearly 20 years, like some others, one or two over there have been there even longer than that. But generally speaking, and it's more than just generally speaking, actually debates have been good. We've agreed to differ, you have a vote, and you move forward in that way. So I think we've got to look at the positives and do what we can to persuade people this is how to behave. And it doesn't matter if we disagree. We can have vigorous debates as long as it's courteous. And I think that's what this council does particularly well. So well done to all involved, and I shall certainly be voting for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm pleased to say I had the opportunity to sign my support for the LGA campaign at the LGA conference in July. And so there's no doubt about where I stand on it. What I want to just say that it would be good to see on behalf of the council is a more active role on the part of our communications team, particularly in the social media forum, and you know, at the minimum, to see factual corrections coming forward, and where there is abuse, there should be some defence of members. I'm as thick-skinned and ugly as anybody, and I post personally in my own name, and I think that's as it should be and it's right. But when I do react is when I see quite a clear implications of corruption, you know, brown paper envelopes, etc., etc. When I have already posted about a planning decision which people are debating, and if I've been on the committee that day, and you know, there's something that's incorrect in what's been said or whatever, to help people understand why the decision, things like that, I will post. And when I see the abuse, then I get very unhappy about it. And I really do think that there is a role for our communications department in, as I said, factual correction, and certainly to reject implications of corruption either on the part of officers or members alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start with a small confession, but which I will address, because sometimes I feel a little bit sceptical about debating motions or business within the council that primarily affects us as councillors, for fear of being perceived as being self-indulgent. But I don't think that on this occasion, because I think there is a couple of really serious principles that we are considering as part of this motion. The first is simple, and I think unobjectionable, that anyone should be free to go about their business without, or indeed their lives, without fear of intimidation or abuse. Secondly, that no elected official or a representative should be subject to violence designed to prevent them from discharging their obligations to the people that elected them, as others have already said. And I totally agree with Councillor Mellon and Councillor Passmore that in this chamber, I think, and as councillors, we always conduct ourselves in a decent manner. But frankly, I don't think that matters in a way. The small elephant in the room, and I know we're not as notorious or as prominent as members of Parliament, but the two people that I think of when we're discussing this debate are Joe Cox and David Amos, who were both killed doing jobs that they love, and frankly, who I'm sure we would all agree were thoroughly decent people, but who were murdered nonetheless. And so I think we should be therefore very clear that we will never tolerate hate in public life and should oppose it at every turn. I think it's as simple as that. I think it's a powerful statement we can make as a council, and for that reason I will be wholeheartedly supporting this motion and commend Councillor Morley and Councillor Mellon for bringing it before us this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. So far, we've mainly talked about what goes on in this chamber. I've had experience as a parish councillor of what I wouldn't have thought of it as a hate campaign, but now having heard this discussion, I realise it was. Two people came to my house to say they wanted to discuss one thing, and they turned against me, and because really what they wanted to talk about was something completely different. And I've seen it in other places. I mean, Stow Upland, I know it's a pretty rough place to live, but but I would not have expected it there. And now I see that it does take place at parish council level. So I think this applies to parish councils, and I think it's important that we remember that. And if there is an opportunity through our communications people to let parish councils know about it, I think that is important, and I will be supporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add my voice to everybody who's spoken so far, and just also to say that I think it's really crucial that we try to encourage more people and a more diverse set of people into standing for election. We often see very conspicuous examples of hate and of violence and of intimidation. And if we can redress that slightly by having a very conspicuous campaign to address that with the Debate Not Hate campaign, if we can join that in a very conspicuous way and talk about how we are addressing it, I'm sure that will be helpful in attracting more people to stand for election to this fabulous chamber.
Thank you very much. Any further contributions? Councillor Mellon, you don't have to say anything at this point, but you're welcome to before I go to Councillor Morley.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things then quickly. I'm not on Twitter. I know some councillors are, but I do kind of keep a weather eye on local social media, and sadly, even on local Facebook pages and community forums, you do see councillors and officers and the council occasionally being denigrated and criticised, quite often for things over which we have no control or responsibility. I appreciate Councillor Matheson's point, and I do myself sometimes try to set the record straight, but it can be an uphill battle. I just want to mention too, of course, I hadn't really mentioned this previously, the last point of the motion does talk about a zero tolerance approach to abuse of councillors and officers. Both are included. We shouldn't tolerate any kind of abuse and intimidation against officers too. I think we just need to perhaps amend the first point of the motion where it says we're going to write to our local member of Parliament, because I think there's at least two, and eventually there might be three, covering Mid-Suffolk. But that's the only very minor thing we perhaps need to amend. And I'm certainly happy that there seems to be support for this motion across the House. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Morley, do you have anything to add?
Just reflecting on some of the things that have been said. In the main, I have not really experienced much in the way of abuse. There have been a couple of instances once where I was visiting a resident and somebody came and parked outside to intimidate me, and then I walked to the property next door to speak to them, and they followed me and drove to the property next door and sat outside till I came out. And then when I came out of there and walked to the post office, they followed me all the way behind me going to the post office. So, and that makes it really difficult for me to support my residents. And so that type of behaviour is just not acceptable. It's only happened once, but in the main abuse that occurs, I find, is online. And it's not the forums where we as a council are present. It's some of the other social media sites, like Nextdoor, for instance, where being helpful, as I am, I post comments occasionally, not very often. But the abuse that you get is a really big deterrent. And so if residents are posting about where can I find this, how can I get help on that, and I am intimidated into not responding, then that is a really big issue. And being the sensitive soul that I am, I have occasionally not responded. And it upsets me and it hurts me that I am placed in that position because of some people who don't know how to behave. So I, together with Councillor John Ward, when we were at the LGA, we both signed up to this campaign back in July at the LGA conference. We've signed as individuals. I would encourage every councillor in this room to sign up as individuals, because as well as signing up as a district council, signing up as individuals greatly greatly enhances our message that we're sending out to everybody. So thank you all for the positive comments that you've all made, and I look forward to progressing these things. In response to Councillor Mellon's point about plurals in terms of our MPs, when I read out the statement, I did refer to members of Parliament, because I did notice that slight irregularity there. So thank you all, everybody, very much for supporting this.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you everyone that contributed, and there's some quite personal contributions there, and thank you for that. So we'll now go to the vote for this motion. I will ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct an electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Councillor Pratt, can I take your vote? Thank you. Chair, that's unanimous. That's 27 votes for.
Thank you very much. So that's carried. So we'll now go on to the second motion of the night. to consider the motion from Councillor Mellon. Councillor Mellon, would you like to move your motion?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sure that all councillors are aware that we have a problem with water quality in this country, and Mid-Suffolk is not exempt from this problem. It's been widely reported in the national press, with some alarming reports of river pollution and beaches being closed due to the danger to swimmers. And even if this morning, if you were listening to the Today programme at 5 to 9, they were discussing a report that's been published today by Surfers Against Sewage on this very issue. We don't have many surfers in Suffolk, but we do still have a problem, and the problem seems to be this. In periods of rainfall, and not just in heavy rainfall, sewage treatment works can become overwhelmed with the volume of surface water coming in. And in these circumstances, treatment works have what is effectively a safety valve, something called a combined storm overflow, CSO, where excess water can be released. And unfortunately, since they receive surface water together with everything else, they don't discharge clean water. And so these storm overflows contain partly raw sewage, untreated, which is discharged direct into the local watercourse. Well, how do we know this? Well, we know it because the water treatment companies, and here it's Anglian Water, have to monitor these overflows and publish the figures. And I've included in the motion wording a table showing 4 sites from across the district with Anglian Water's own figures from last year. This is not the full picture, but at least it is an indication of the problem. Now, I'm not saying that Anglian Water is pumping out raw undiluted sewage on all these occasions for all these hours, but a combined storm overflow is exactly that, combined surface water and sewage. And clearly this is not just happening in extreme storm events, but much more often, with treatment sites unable to cope on a regular basis. So this is the problem. And it's a problem for the environment, with often severe effects on the ecosystems downstream. Without going into the details of excess nutrients, biological oxygen demand and so on, I think we can understand there's a problem there. But it's also a health risk for people who use the rivers. You know, whether it's fishermen, kayakers, paddleboarders, or increasingly wild swimmers. Yes, people do swim in our rivers, or in the rivers that flow out of Mid-Suffolk. There's been a huge interest in wild swimming in the last few years. There are lots of benefits to physical and mental health, but clearly they are somewhat undermined if you pick up E. coli while you're doing it. So whilst I'm not recommending swimming in water which has not been declared safe for bathing, we know that it happens. So what role does the council play in all this, and how will this motion help? I think firstly we can play our part by publicly scrutinising this problem. So the first part of the motion asks our scrutiny committee to take a look, inviting representatives from the various bodies that are involved and question them so that we can understand the scale of the problem and what is already being done to address it. And secondly, we have a role because we are the local planning authority. And through our planning process and through our local plan, we end up giving permission for hundreds of new homes each year. More homes means more people, and as surely as night follows day, this means increased volumes of sewage requiring treatment. Now, Anglian Water is the only provider of water treatment works, and basically has to take this extra sewage. It's what we call the duty to connect. And this is really the nub of the problem. So when we have a major development and Anglian Water is asked as a statutory consultee to respond, they have a kind of standard answer. Anglian Water has the network capacity to take flows from this development. But what they're saying there is basically, you know, the pipes can take it. But actually what we really need to know is, can they treat it? Or, you know, are these 50 homes or 85 homes or 150 homes going to end up contributing to storm overflows, discharging untreated sewage? So this motion proposes a small tweak to our planning procedure. When an application for a major development comes in, we want just a little bit more information from Anglian Water than they currently provide. And this is the third paragraph of the motion. We would like to know which treatment works will be managing the sewage, what is the capacity of that facility to treat the additional volumes, and whether the increased volume will increase discharges of untreated sewage. Now, we cannot force Anglian Water to provide this information, but we can ask. And clearly it would be in Anglian Water's interest to provide the information where it can. Now, further to this, in paragraph 4 of the motion, we're asking that planning officers, when they prepare a report for major applications, those that come to planning committee, they include in that report a specific section on the potential of the development to contribute to discharges of untreated sewage, or to report back on the information received or not received. Let me just state briefly what this motion is not about. It is not seeking to create planning policy by council motion, nor is it seeking to make this issue a material consideration, because under planning law currently it can't be. So we're not seeking to use this issue to frustrate development. And for example, if a planning committee member proposed refusal of an application on the basis that it would increase discharges of sewage, our senior planning officers would make it very clear that that is not a defensible reason. Officers have highlighted to me where the planning inspectorate have overturned refusals of that kind. So what would this motion achieve? This is, I think, an area where there's a gap in the information that we use, and a lack of clear information is harming the public interest. The issue needs to be examined in the clear light of day. We need all the stakeholders in this to share what they are doing to combat this problem. I think scrutiny is a good place to do this. And we need to understand clearly what the impact of new development is contributing to the problem. And I believe the minor change that I proposed to our planning procedure will help to spotlight this issue. I'm happy to propose this motion, and I'm grateful to Councillor Fleming for her input in formulating it and for agreeing to second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Mellon, for raising the issue and for offering me the opportunity to second it. So I welcome and endorse the motion, and I'm very pleased to be able to comment, particularly as I also chair the Suffolk Flood Risk Scrutiny Committee, where we've been looking at water quality as well as actual flooding. We've actually added water quality to our terms of reference, and I think that's an important step as well. You're probably aware that in Suffolk and in mid-Suffolk, none of our surface water, rivers or streams, are classed as good. They are all poor or moderate in their water quality condition, which is monitored by the Environment Agency. I'm just going to touch on the Gipping catchment as an example, and then say something, augment what my colleague has said about what Mid-Suffolk can possibly do to help. The general discontent, I might add, among the public about poor water quality is enormous and growing. The Gipping discharges to the Orwell estuary. This is a Ramsar site. It's a special protection area and a triple SI, and it supports rare birds in nationally significant numbers. The Gipping is under high pressure also for amenity, fishing and recreation by people, but it is classed of poor ecological status, due mainly to phosphate and oxygen depletion. But it also fails for several newly listed chemical, persistent and biologically accumulative pollutants. Pollutant sources such as wastewater treatment plants, which in this case operated by Anglian Water, such as at Stowmarket and Needham Market, contribute, as well as industry and agriculture. The Waveney is another important river in mid-Suffolk, and this is a beautiful river rising near Redgrave. It passes through the Lopham Fen triple SI, onto Diss and Hoxton, where it is joined by the River Dove. Discharges of untreated sewerage during heavy rainfall combine to overflow the storm system, and as my colleague has said, under the current regime are released untreated. And this happens frequently, and I may add, also exceed the allowable number of discharges that the Environment Agency tolerates. And the Environment Agency, I know, and Anglian Water are working together to try and resolve this situation, but without major investment and a change in the legislature, there is a limit to what can be done. Currently, developers, as has been said, have an automatic right to connect. However, legislation under the Environment Act, Flood and Water Management Act, would change that. And this is something that I think this council can try to lobby for. Some of the changes of Schedule 3 of the Water Management Act would mean that the automatic right to connect that developers currently have would be removed. It would also mandate implementation of sustainable drainage for all new developments and ensure surface water is managed in a sustainable manner. It would ensure that sustainable drainage on new developments are adopted properly. And this is something that where the planning system can help. And this would secure the long-term maintenance of these features, which are frequently failing. Currently, we have concerns about long-term maintenance of SUDs. And fourthly, SUDs on new developments must be constructed to the current standards. Currently, this is not a function of the lead local flood authority. And planning authorities do not have the resource or expertise to undertake the work. So having proper adoption and a long-term plan will do a lot to help. But what can this district council do? We've already mentioned some of the things, and dialogue with Anglian Water is a starting point. But until the legislation mentioned is formalised, there are things we can do to implement this DEFRA's Stormwater Overflows Discharge Reduction Plan, which you can look up on the internet. It was released this summer. We can work with developers to update our design guide to bring into that design guide the criteria in the discharge reduction plan. We can designate new river bathing sites to give local communities the tools they need, because once a site is designated as a bathing site, it gives extra tools to communities to work with the Environment Agency and clean it up and monitor it. And we can also engage with Anglian Water as statutory consultees on planning applications. In other words, there is a lot we can do, and it largely involves planning. And in conclusion, this motion reflects our concerns about water quality. It recognises our responsibility to act where we possibly can do so. Clean water can and will be treated as a higher priority in council programmes than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming, and there will be an opportunity to speak again at the end of debate should you want it. So I'll move on to debate. The same rules for debate as before, 3 minutes and 1 contribution, please. And the first person to speak will be Councillor Passmore.
Twice in one night. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, sir. Just a few comments. I'm going to support this motion. I don't have a problem with that, because I do think that looking after our water resources far better is really, really crucial. It's a precious resource, and far too many people generally in the whole of the UK take it for granted. And we need to have a bit of a mindset here to change that. And so anything we can do to reduce sewage discharge, of course, has to be welcome. Matthew and others on Planning A will know I've, in just about every single case, say where there's a major development. Can we not do something to stop this obsession with concreting over hard surfaces for driveways and everything else, minimise it, so the water percolates into the groundwater? Because if we don't start to do something about that, it will act as a serious constraint on economic development, housing growth for young people and all sorts of things. So now is the time to look at what else could we do. Now, I'm not an expert, fortunately, on planning policy, but it does get my goat, the fact that there seems to be a real difficulty with trying to put things like that on as conditions. So, in addition, I do think that's something to look at. That doesn't obviate the need to have this motion, because I quite agree with it. And the other thing I'm always puzzled about, we live in the driest part of the country. Why is it that when we have large estates designed from now on, why do we actually mix up sewage and stormwater, drainage water? It can't be beyond the wit of man to actually find a dual system as part of something we should be doing going forwards. So if we allowed more water to percolate into the groundwater system, where most of our water actually comes from borehole in the chalk aquifer. That would be really good. And the other thing, just picking up on Jessica's point about some of the rivers, we've got some fantastic rivers in mid-Suffolk. They may not be as big as some other areas, but if you look, for example, the Rat, the Gipping, the Dove Valley, not far from where I live, and I did, of course, think about this on had to go to Lowestoft today, and so I went along the A143 going up to Beccles, and I did travel into Norfolk, because that's where the road is, and looked over that beautiful Waveney Valley, and I thought, thank God I can see it from an inferior place and look at how beautiful it is. I know I'm pulling everybody's leg here, looking at it from Norfolk into Suffolk. It is a real jewel in the crown. You go there in summer with or at late spring as the leaves are coming out, that glorious mixture of green and everything else. You look at the wildlife, the English longhorn cattle grazing on the meadows there. That's something that damn well needs to be looked after. And I do think water resources are fundamental to that. So anything we can do to improve on that, you can definitely count me in. And I'd love it in future if we can look at what we can do with our planning policy. Now is not the time to debate it. But there are some pretty obvious common sense things that we could do. But sadly, because of national legislation, common sense doesn't often pervade in what we need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Passmore, and that was absolutely perfect timing to the exact second of the 3 minutes. So thank you very much. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much, Chair. A few comments to make on this motion, although I can't guarantee I'll be as perfect as Councillor Passmore in his timing, but I'll do my best. Firstly, just as a general comment, I have great sympathy with I think what this motion is fundamentally trying to achieve. And I again agree with the premise of I think what the motion is getting to, that our status as the local planning authority does give us the opportunity to influence areas that don't fall under our sort of direct statutory control. SIL funding and the opportunities to improve infrastructure is a perfect example of that. But I do think, and I wish to sort of emphasise this point, that the caveat that Councillor Mellon added in his introduction is especially important, that we must remind ourselves and must stress that what we're considering in terms of changes to the planning system does not mean that water quality or anything that we're considering here would then be a material consideration for refusal of a planning application. And of course, ultimately, it would be for the regulator, Ofwat, rather than Mid-Suffolk, to ensure that our water supply is safe and sustainable. And so for that reason, and obviously I stress that point, but considering the merits of this motion, I can find no reason to oppose it. I think we really should sort of emphasise that last point, that we, as councillors or as a council entity, I'm always of the view that we shouldn't be in a position where we're over-promising and under-delivering. So I think it's right that we stress what we are responsible for versus what we're not responsible for. But that doesn't prevent me from supporting this motion. The only sort of aspect I might like to see clarified or changed, and Chair, I'm in your hands and with the proposer and second of the motion, whether you would like this as a formal amendment or just as an informal suggestion. But I think in addition to any proposed changes to the planning system, I also think it's worthwhile, again, similar to the previous motion, writing to our MPs, writing to Ofwat to express our concern and express our desire to see water quality improved. Because as has been referenced, we have only limited levers to influence Anglia Water, and actually what influence we can bring to bear on those who can change Anglia Water's operations would be enormously beneficial, I think. So for that reason, I'm happy to support the motion, and perhaps if I could ask the Chair whether the proposer and second would agree with my suggestions. If so, I won't propose that as a formal amendment, but I think it's an important consideration. Thank you very much.
I'll look to the proposer. Nod. The seconder. Nod. Yeah, okay, thank you. And next to speak is Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. I've represented the village of Mendlesham for almost 2 decades, and it's the source of many good things, is Mendlesham. And I remember one day throwing leaflets through people's doors, whether they wanted them or not, and a lovely gentleman from Mendlesham Green called Mr. Arbon said, I want to show you something. Okay. And we walked up a little footpath to where there was this quite large ditch in the middle of nowhere. And I'm thinking, is this it? Is this the shovel round the back of the head? And I'm being left dead in a ditch. And it wasn't. And what he pointed to at the bottom of the ditch, he said, what do you see when you look down at that ditch? I said, well, hang on a minute. The water's running in 2 different directions. And he said, yeah. That way is the source of the River Dove, and that way is the source of the River Gipping. So Mendlesham is the source of 2 rivers. And I found that absolutely fascinating. He showed me a load of history of when someone had actually had barges coming all the way up from Stowmarket, apparently, up to Mendlesham. Phenomenal. So water, and particularly water quality, is something that we should take incredibly seriously. And there are many frustrations in development control. Some get overable, some aren't. But I think the issue of water and sewage capacity is one of those ones that members of the public think that we have a lot of authority over this, when in fact we don't. And it's mostly because the utility is privatised. I'm not going to rehearse the arguments of privatisation, but what's set down in that statute probably should have been a tad tighter than it is at the moment. Because what we end up going through at development control often is what I call an absolute charade. And case in point was Committee B, back in September, where there were 4 items, 3 of which had the same response from Anglia Water. And I'll read out the response. There's a development in Mendlesham, and it says, the foul drainage from this development is in the catchment of Stowmarket Water Recycling Centre, which currently does not have the capacity to treat the flows from the development site. Anglia Water are obligated to accept the foul flows from the development with the benefit of planning consent, and would therefore take the necessary steps to ensure there is sufficient treatment capacity should the planning authority grant permission. That's a statement of the law. That's actually not at all helpful. What we want to know is, if we connect this up, will this mean that more raw sewage events in our river system will take place or not? That's actually all we really need to know, because we need to out that almost glossing over and not answering the direct question. In supporting this motion, I think it will help us do that. And I don't want to lay the blame all at Anglia Water's door. Part of the legislation and how we've stacked it up in this country, there's almost a perverse incentive for a water company to reach a gold standard on this. Because if you try and invest money to hit the gold standard, you don't get, and if you don't hit that gold standard, you don't get any money at all from government. So you can invest in upping the water quality, invest an awful lot of money, and not get any repayment from government unless you hit that very, very gold standard. I think we need to sort of look at changing that legislation. So if you improve it, you get almost a sliding scale of grant from the government to assist in actually making it better than it is at the moment. But I think this will be a very, very small step in getting some light shone onto this area so that people have clarity as what our role is as a planning authority, and that we're doing everything we possibly can to mitigate more sewage outfall events in our rivers, because the treatment capacity is a legal obligation of the water company. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And if you'd mind indulging me for a moment, I'd just like to say a few words on this issue. As the Drainage Board member for Mid-Suffolk and also the Vice Chair of the Suffolk Flood Risk Scrutiny Committee that Councillor Fleming was talking about, we started looking into this issue quite a long time ago, maybe a year ago, just before it became a big issue within the public. I was absolutely shocked by the size of this issue, how much we would have to spend to fix it, but I do believe it's fixable. One of the really shocking things is just 100 metres or more away from this very chamber, there's an outflow that regularly pumps sewage into the river, as well as many other all over our district. But and also being a farmer, agriculture is also another big polluter of the rivers. So I think I think Councillor Fleming has sold herself short, though, on what she said with her when she seconded the motion, because she's done a huge amount in the Suffolk Flood Risk Scrutiny Committee to get together a stakeholder meeting of the Rivers Trust, Anglia Water, the Environment Agency, Suffolk County Council, and many other people to look into this. And we had a day of discussing these issues, and two of the main issues were to do with these sewage outflows. She also put a letter in to the Minister on this, which I was very proud to sign as well, which was talking about removing this Section 3, which is the right to put sewage into the watercourse from developments. We had a very positive response from that letter. The thing about it is, while I've been on this council, I've seen issues in Fressingfield and Whirlingworth where we've got serious problems with outflows. Something needs to change, and it does seem like the wheels are in motion to make that change. I completely support this motion. I think it's a really good motion for this council to make, and thank you very much. Next will be Councillor Byrne.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to support any action which draws attention to the inadequacies of the sewage system, partly because I suffer from those inadequacies myself, in the sense that although I know we're talking here about outflows into the drainage systems, into the rivers and streams, inadequacies of the system, the sewage system, also affect outflows onto the ground. We just happen to live at the end of the whole of Mellis and Yaxley's sewage system, and before we're the lowest point in that system, before it shoots across the fields to the eye treatment plant, and that pipe that takes it across those fields is just 6 inches in diameter for the whole of that population. So, although it's not directly concerned with what you're talking about this evening, it's very much indirectly concerned with it, and I do support the motion completely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Well, item 1 asks for the Chair of the Scrutiny Committee to invite senior officers of the relevant bodies, which you can all read for yourself. I think this really does bring the issue to light, because I think sometimes representatives from these various bodies don't get the questioning, perhaps, that they might deserve. And I think it bringing a spotlight on it by bringing it to Scrutiny Committee, because it has the power to look at anything that affects our residents, actually might make them a little bit more aware of the issues. I also think support for changes to the law and lobbying for that, whether it be for our local MPs, whether it be for the government minister, is something that should, and all councils within the country should be doing, because it's a disgrace in this day and age that we're actually pumping sewage water into the river courses. It's a disgrace that we pump it right into the ocean as well, and there are many cases of that. We saw a TV event, I think it was in Cornwall, the other week, where the water was literally brown going into a lovely part of the Cornish coastline. So anything we can do, I think, as members, whether it's through the Scrutiny Committee and members of this council, to highlight the issue and keep the issue at the top of the agenda, I think it has to be supported. So I'll certainly be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Geek.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I very much support this motion as well. As other councillors have said, It is a small step, but it's a symbolic one in the right direction. And it was really heartening to hear Councillor Fleming talking about designating some river bathing sites. There are several good ones to choose from, but all are currently affected by sewage discharges. The Elmswell sewage discharge, that flows into the Blackbourne North, and it's joined by the Badwell Ash sewage discharge, coming west via that tiny little stream. There's really not very much water in it at all, through Langham and Huntston, and those combined discharges then run through the Suffolk Wildlife Trust's Nature Reserve at Micklemere, with its otters and birds and bird watchers, to Sappiston. And the Blackbourne at Sappiston is incredibly picturesque, and that's where I normally swim. And I am not alone in swimming in Suffolk's rivers. Wild Suffolk Swimmers has over 800 people on its mailing list. The Suffolk Blue Tits cold water swimmers have over 1,000 people. They both run several swims every week, all through the year, and perhaps I've just thought maybe we should invite our MPs to join us at those. The Stonham Aspel discharge, that flows southwest through the Suffolk County Council-owned local nature reserve of Fen Alder Carr in Creting St Peter, and that joins the River Gipping just north of Needham Market. People swim a little bit further down the Gipping at Needham, where there's a pool with a rope swing near the lake. But the most popular place of all is Bramford. Wild Suffolk swimmers there can only really swim in the early mornings because later in the day it's often too busy. It has families paddling, teenagers jumping off the bridge. There are also kayakers, paddle boarders and rowing dinghies there. It's an incredibly well-used free resource. There's a huge asset to our whole community. It's good for physical and mental health, and it also, of course, helps people value their natural environment. But people don't want to use the rivers. They don't want to get in the rivers if they've heard that they're dangerous, and they certainly don't want to use them if they smell bad, as they can do at present. And it's taken decades, really all my life, to be able to swim in rivers because they've been recovering after the chemical and industrial spillages of the 20th century. And really, let's not endanger that recovery now. Let's do everything we can. Let's take, even if it is a small step. I'm really thrilled that this motion has got cross-chamber support.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. One of my residents has been subject to some of this nasty stuff. So I have first-hand experience where a discharge, I believe, from one of the sites that's actually referenced in the table, caused by inadequate treatment plants being placed in, which meant that the overflow went into the ditch, which then went into his fish pond, which then killed all his fish, flooded his garden, and left raw sewage lying around in his garden. Pretty disgusting, really. So I have every intention of supporting this, and I don't want to amend the motion, but I would just like to ask the Chair of Scrutiny, when they actually start to look at this in more detail, it's not just Anglian Water that may be causing this. There are private sites around who are contributing to this great disgraceful situation, and I would just like to ask that you consider those in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is anyone waiting? Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was really excited by when this motion was submitted, and I totally agree with it. I think one thing to reflect upon is the reason that this motion is really, really important is of course the sort of health and social benefits that our waterways can give us, but also the environmental importance of our rivers, wetlands and estuaries as well. If these ecosystems are subjected to chronic and high levels of pollutants and nutrients coming out of the sewage system, it can eventually lead to like a tipping point in some circumstances. We go from species-rich ecosystems that are often dominated by aquatic plants and so on, to a system that is less diverse, less species rich, often dominated by algae. And it's quite difficult, once you've crossed that threshold into that alternative state, it's sometimes quite difficult to bring it back. You know, the Norfolk Broads being a really splendid example in some cases, although there are efforts to restore some of those Broads back to their sort of former glory. So really, it's really important. It doesn't just reduce biodiversity, but it also impairs these ecosystems to carry out their incredibly important functions, things like water filtration, processing of nutrients, sequestration of carbon in terms of wetlands and estuaries as well. In fact, in some rivers around the world, scientists have pointed out that there are vast areas in the coastal ocean which are kind of termed as dead zones, ecological dead zones, because there are vast areas where the sediments in the ocean bed and the water, the water column have just been totally deoxygenated, and very little life can survive in these places. Of course, that's detrimental to fisheries and everything. So this is all, you know, there are many sort of links, and it is a complex problem. I just wanted to touch on one thing. I feel that Councillor Caston has you know, sort of almost permitted me to touch on this now. But it's not just sewage treatment plants. I know that that's what we're just debating in this motion. The River Wye has had many case studies over the last couple of years, some instigated by the journalist George Monbiot. They've found that whilst the River Wye is subjected to really high levels of sewage outflows and pollution from that source, nutrient levels originating from high-density chicken farms outstrip the contributions to pollution from sewage outflows. So I think I also sort of have to, just as an observation or a point to note perhaps.
Councillor Pratt, I'm really sorry, but you're over your 3 minutes, but
okay.
I'm really enjoying your technical detail.
Well, I just wanted to just make one quick note, because this is about planning.
Yeah, please just make your closing statement.
So we could have more stringent planning process when it comes to giving permissions to intensive farming like chicken factories that could contribute to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Field.
Thank you. So I'll repeat all the points that I really agree with. Certainly going to support this motion. I was just to say the parish councillors at Bramford used to bend my ear endlessly about the amount of swimming that went on off the bridge there, as has been pointed out. And the interesting thing is that they used to say they did it as young lads, so it's not something that's occurred over the last year or two, or decade or two, or it's a long-term exercise. And I totally welcome the effort to put some pressure on Anglian Water to improve their investment in their business, basically. And I can point out that if you look at the number of discharge events on the top line of this report, 108 is once every 3.5 days. Is that really an emergency discharge? You know, my measure, it rains quite frequently at times of the year, like now, but it doesn't reach emergency levels once every 3.5 days. And if you look at the times of discharge, that's 18 hours on average per discharge. So they clearly have a major problem here that needs addressing. It might be chicken farms, as you've just heard, but whatever it is, there is a clear need to clean water up for the benefit of all of us and for the benefit of the environment, and it is just not being done. So any effort we can make to bring some pressure to publicise this, to make the management teams in those industries respond, is to me totally welcome. So I certainly will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Carter, and then I think we'll sum up the debate. Thank you.
I chose it wrong to come at the end when Councillor Pratt and Councillor Field tend to nice, concise arguments, and I tend to Pratt and get in a muddle. So I try to keep it below 3 minutes. I will have to say that I always do feel quite irked when I see Anglia Water mentioned on a planning film, because it has as well been, I believe it's been recorded by the Environment Agency as requiring significant improvements. Not only for the overflow, but also for the, I believe it was 170 megalitres of water per day from pipes lost. Well, that's actually quite a minimum number from other companies. And I do have to say, after hearing reports from Councillor Geek about the wild swimming, a little bit of pettiness on my part, not one to support because I can't swim anymore, but other than that. But we are here today because we have a responsibility to our residents. We have a responsibility to actually say, to be aware of what's going on, aware of, even if we haven't got the overall control over it, but we have to say that we are aware, we have seen this, we support and we are looking out for you. And if we are aware of this situation, by all means, we must say something about it. And this is a perfect forum, this is a perfect way of going ahead about it. So I am really pleased to hear all the reports from across the chamber of people supporting this motion. And even, this is a perfect case to start. There are other issues that we are aware of. We are other issues that we haven't got the overall say over, but we can still make a statement. We can still say, not just in planning, but there's other planning issues, but we can still say, we've noticed this, we're picking up on it, people need to start getting their act together, and we're watching them do so. So this is the prime candidate for it, and so I'm in full support of this motion, and I hope we use this as a example, as a starting point to actually look at other issues as well, not just water, and say that we're aware, we keep an eye out, and we will support our residents. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Warboys had his hand up before when I said that we'd summarise. So Councillor Warboys, and then we'll go to summaries.
Thank you, Chair. I started to wave when you said you were about to summarise. Yes, I think a few things. One is, I think, looking forward to the office of Anglia Water coming forward to be scrutinised. We shouldn't have any problem with their attendance. Ofwat has actually given Anglia Water an A rating for customer engagement. That's the only A rating Anglia Water's got. The Environment Agency gives it a 2-star rating. It's the 3rd highest rate of total pollution incidents and a quarter of serious pollution incidents. And this is a huge problem for Anglia Water. They do recognise, they put forward in their defence that their most acute issues in its region, it's the largest in area of all the water companies. Climatic change, population housing growth, and the need to protect and enhance the natural environment. It doesn't actually mention mixing sewage and stormwaters. So I think they would be only too keen to come forward and publicly defend their position. They have recently been fined £8.3 million for missing targets on pollution, flooding and base mains. That sounds like a significant amount. It's about 8% of their dividends. 85% of their dividends go overseas. It's a public company, but it's privately owned. It's owned by a consortium of international pension and private equity funds, and it's registered in Jersey. And I think that is where we are going to struggle to get Ofwat to seriously invest in its local infrastructure until there is a significant change in legislation which makes it a material issue in planning and development, we're not going to get that kind of change we need from them. But I think we need to bring Anglia Water to publicly defend their position and to account for specific issues. Thank you. I am supporting the motion.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Fleming seconded this. Do you wish to say anything at this point?
Well, thank you very much. Well, I won't say much because so much has been said. But I think this is obviously a very complex situation. Cleaning up our waters is terribly important. I'm a wild swimmer myself, but I tend to go to the sea rather than rivers. I feel it's a little bit safer. I think going back to what we can do, it looks as if planning is our tool for the most part. But I think also it's clearly a health and well-being issue. And I think maybe our health and well-being strategy and our approach to use of public open spaces, we need to include possibly water and rivers as part of our open space strategy. It is, whether it's formally publicly accessible or not, the public accesses it and uses it to their benefit. And I think that may be an area we can bring in a bit more clout. But I think until we get that full implementation of the Water Management Act of 2010, we are limited, and we must push for that. And I think we're close now. We also, DEFRA is a big player here, not so much for sewage treatment, but for farming, because DEFRA determines what rates pesticides and fertilizers are applied at, along with the manufacturers of them. And farmers will apply according to the directions. Are the directions properly risk assessed for their biodiversity impacts, their bioaccumulative effects, as the chemicals go into the waterways, are taken up by various organisms and bioconcentrated again into the food chain? I'm not confident that all that is happening as well as we would like. But anyway, I'm so glad for full support in the Chamber. Thank you very much. And let's do our small bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mellon, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and very grateful for all the contributions. I won't say much. I think there's still a chance of getting home for the second half of the Brazil game. But I'm very happy to take Councillor Richardson's suggestion that we write to, I think it was off what you suggested. I don't know if we need to formalise that in the motion or whether we just sort of take that as agreed.
Yeah, I'll take that as agreed. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, no issues in the Chamber. Yeah, we'll take that as agreed.
I think this motion attempts to leverage the little bit of power that we have in planning to maybe shine a spotlight on this area. I sense there's a frustration that we can't do more, but this is what we can do, and I'm very glad for the cross-party support. Can I just finish, in a slightly unusual way, by recommending a book. It's a book that was written by a Mid-Suffolk resident, sadly no longer with us, a man called Roger Deakin, who lived in Councillor Warboy's ward at Mellis, a book called Waterlog. Reading that book opened my eyes to the issues around water, around wild swimming, very much the sort of Bible for wild swimmers. I recommend reading it, and I recommend you supporting this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we'll take that to the vote now. I will ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct an electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open for councillors to cast their vote. Councillor Pratt. take your vote then? Chair, that is unanimous. That is 27 votes for.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and so that's carried. And the next meeting is on Thursday, the 26th of January, at the normal 5:30 p.m. and I'll finish this meeting at 7:06. Thank you.